In the long, strange, and often brutal history of humankind, few events are more bizarre than what happened in the city of Strasbourg in the summer of 1518. It's a story that sounds like a dark fairy tale, a historical fever dream that defies any easy explanation. For weeks, hundreds of ordinary people were gripped by an unstoppable urge to dance. They weren't dancing for joy. They danced in a frenzy, without rest, until their bodies gave out, and in some cases, until they died. This was the dancing plague of 1518, a terrifying mystery that has baffled historians for over 500 years. What could possibly drive people to dance themselves to death? Here, we're going to explore the 5 most mind-blowing theories, from a terrifying curse to a collective psychological breakdown, to try and uncover the truth behind one of history's most disturbing events. The story goes that it all began in July 1518. In the sweltering heat, on a quiet cobblestone street, a woman known as Frau Trophia stepped out of her home. But she wasn't heading to the market or visiting a friend. She began to dance. There was no music. Her face was a mask of grim determination, not joy. Sources say she danced for several days straight, her body racked with spasms, until she finally collapsed from sheer exhaustion. But the nightmare was just beginning. After she started, others soon joined in. Within a week, over 30 people were caught in the same frantic, involuntary movements. By the end of the month, that number had swelled to an estimated 400. They were trapped in a dance that, for some, would end in death. The city authorities were thrown into chaos. At first, they were baffled. Then, they made a decision that may have been catastrophic. Local physicians, consulting the wisdom of the era, declared the plague to be a natural disease caused by hot blood. Their prescription? The dancers had to gyrate the fever away. They believed the cure was more dancing. Based on this theory, the city council ordered public spaces cleared and may have even erected a stage and hired musicians, hoping to help the afflicted sweat out their sickness. But this seems to have only fanned the flames of the mania. The constant motion appeared to encourage more people to join the horrifying spectacle. Soon, the streets of Strasbourg were filled with the sight of hundreds of people twitching and thrashing, their eyes vacant. Many collapsed from what modern doctors would likely diagnose as exhaustion, strokes, and heart attacks. Some later accounts, which may be exaggerated, claim that at the plague's height, up to 15 people were dying each day. The phenomenon finally subsided in the late summer, as mysteriously as it had begun, after the remaining dancers were sent to a mountain shrine to pray. But the central question has haunted us ever since. What happened? Let's get into the theories. The most widely accepted explanation among modern historians is a phenomenon known as mass psychogenic illness, or, as it's more commonly known, mass hysteria. To get this theory, you have to understand the world the people of Strasbourg were living in. The year 1518 was not a happy time. The region was on the brink, ravaged by forces beyond anyone's control. A series of brutal famines had left the poor, starving, and diseases like smallpox and syphilis were a constant presence. This wasn't just physical hardship, it was a period of profound psychological distress. According to historian John Waller, the leading expert on this event, the people of Strasbourg were living under a level of extreme, unrelenting stress that's hard for us to imagine. He argues this crushing anxiety created the perfect conditions for a mass psychological breakdown. The dancing wasn't a choice. It was an unconscious physical response to unbearable mental anguish. It was a dissociative state, where people essentially lost control of their own bodies. In this view, the plague spread not like a virus, but like an idea. Once a few people began exhibiting these bizarre symptoms, the behavior became a contagious script for how to express extreme suffering. It was a physical manifestation of a city's collective trauma. This theory is powerful because it doesn't need a poison or a supernatural curse. It suggests the cause was the most terrifying thing of all the human mind pushed past its breaking point. For a long time, the leading scientific theory was that the dancers had been poisoned, specifically by a fungus called ergot, which can grow on the stalks of damp rye, a primary grain used for bread back then. This theory is tantalizing because ergot contains chemical compounds related to the hallucinogenic drug LSD. Ergotism, the illness from ingesting this fungus, can cause horrifying symptoms. violent muscle spasms, convulsions, and vivid hallucinations. At first glance, this seems like a perfect fit. If a large batch of rye bread was contaminated, it could have simultaneously affected a huge portion of the population. However, most modern historians, including John Waller, have cast serious doubt on this idea. There's a major problem with the symptoms. But while ergot does cause spasms, it also severely restricts blood flow to the body's extremities. This leads to gangrene, an intensely painful condition that would make it virtually impossible for someone to dance for days on end. The coordinated and sustained dancing that witnesses described simply doesn't line up with the debilitating effects of ergot poisoning. So, while it's a compelling thought, the theory of the poisoned bread just doesn't hold up under scrutiny. The dancers' bodies were breaking from exhaustion, not from the telltale signs of ergotism. To really understand the dancing plague, we have to step into the 16th century mindset. This was a world steeped in faith, fear, and superstition. And in this world, there was a very specific belief that could explain what was happening: the curse of Saint Vitus. Saint Vitus was a saint associated with protection against nervous disorders and epilepsy, but he was also believed to have the power to inflict a terrible punishment on sinners, a plague of uncontrollable, compulsive dancing. This wasn't just some forgotten piece of folklore, it was a living, breathing fear. In fact, other outbreaks of dancing mania had been recorded in the region before, and some were linked to the saint. So when Frau Trophäus started her frantic jig, people didn't necessarily see it as a random medical event. Many saw it as divine punishment. This belief acted as a powerful cultural script. For those under immense psychological stress, the belief in Saint Vitus's curse may have subconsciously provided the form their breakdown took. They weren't just moving randomly, they were performing the very curse they feared. The authorities' eventual solution, sending the dancers to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus to pray for forgiveness, shows just how seriously this belief was taken. The curse may not have been a physical cause, but it was the language through which the entire terrifying episode was expressed. While many citizens feared a saint's curse, the physicians of Strasbourg had a different idea, rooted in the medical science of their day. They diagnosed the dancers with a condition they called hot blood. This was based on humoral theory, an ancient system that held that the body was governed by 4 fluids, or humors, and that health depended on keeping them in balance. According to the city's doctors, the dancers were suffering from an excess of hot blood, driving them into a frenzy. This diagnosis is fascinating because it dictated the official response, which turned into a disastrous case of what we'd now call medical malpractice. The physicians reasoned that if the problem was an excess of heat, the only way to cure it was to let the patients burn it off. Their prescription was, literally, to dance until they dropped. This is the leading explanation for why the city council arranged for open spaces and hired musicians. They thought they were providing therapy. Of course, they were likely doing the exact opposite. By encouraging non-stop exertion in the middle of a hot summer, their cure was actively contributing to the deaths from exhaustion and collapse. This theory reveals a critical aspect of the tragedy. The authorities were trying to help, but their understanding of the human body was so profoundly different from ours that their solution became part of the problem. In the 16th century, the line between medicine and religion was blurry at best. For every physician who spoke of hot blood, there was a priest or citizen who saw the work of a much darker force, demonic possession. In a deeply religious society grappling with inexplicable suffering, it was natural to look for supernatural causes. The dancers' wild, uncontrolled movements were seen by many as clear signs that their bodies had been taken over by evil spirits. The dancing plague wasn't just a disease of the body or mind, but a spiritual war being waged on the streets of their city. This belief was closely tied to the idea of divine punishment for sin. Some clergy and observers interpreted the plague as a direct consequence of the community's moral failings. The famous physician Paracelsus, who investigated the event years later, wrote about how such manias could be linked to sin and moral transgressions. This interpretation had a powerful social effect. It created an atmosphere of fear and guilt, which may have only amplified the psychological stress that many historians believe was the root cause. When people believe they are being punished for their sins, any strange feeling can be interpreted as evidence of that punishment, creating a feedback loop of fear and physical reaction. This theory is a crucial piece of the puzzle, because it shows that the dancing plague wasn't just a medical or psychological event, It was a social and religious crisis that shook the community's entire worldview. So, what truly caused hundreds of people to dance, some to their deaths, in 1518? The final, definitive answer remains lost to history. There's no single piece of evidence that can close the case for good. However, the most compelling modern explanation is that the dancing plague wasn't caused by one thing, but by a perfect storm of factors. The strongest theory is that it was a case of mass psychogenic illness, a collective psychological breakdown born from the unimaginable stress of famine, disease, and dread that defined life in Strasbourg. This profound anxiety was then channeled into uncontrollable dancing because of a powerful local belief in the curse of St. Vitus. It was a culturally bound script for despair. The misguided medical advice about hot blood and the terrifying belief in demonic possession only added fuel to the fire, turning a local outbreak of hysteria into a deadly epidemic. The dancing plague of 1518 is a chilling reminder of the profound connection between the mind and the body, and how social and psychological pressures can manifest in terrifying physical ways. It's a story about a society pushed to its absolute limit, where the only outlet for suffering was a dance of desperation. But what do you think is the most convincing explanation? Was it a psychological breakdown, a strange poison, or something else entirely? Let me know your theory in the comments below. And if you found this look into one of history's strangest mysteries fascinating, be sure to subscribe for more stories from the dark corners of the past. Thanks for watching.